Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today we're continuing to work on our clone about vegetation versus the undead. Now last time we made some changes to our squash thanks to your feedback, but we also added the garlic and hypno shroom plants to the game, which required us to rewrite our zombies' behavior code a bit. It was mostly a success, however our hypno shroom code somehow ended up with our zombies eating themselves instead of other zombies, something we're definitely gonna have to fix. But not today, because today's plan is to add a few more plants to the game. We'll mostly be focusing on terrain-specific plants, but we'll also start working on a few of the remaining plants requiring their own unique code. And if all goes well, we'll be one step closer to finally getting through adding all the remaining plants. So let's not waste any more time and get to the coding. Now, between videos I decided to add enums to our project, just to make life a bit easier for us. Honestly, considering how many different plants there are, I'm surprised I didn't do this sooner. Anyway, before we could add any new plants, we needed some water. For now, the water would just be its own object with no extra functionality. And now that we had water, we could make lily pads. Lily pads are a special plant that can only be placed on water tiles. This allows plants that normally can't sit on water to now be able to, well, sit on water via the lily pad. So in our plant object, when a lily pad is placed, it would keep track of the water tile it's placed on and deactivate it. And for now, we're just assuming these terrain-specific plants are being placed under the right conditions. And then when the lily pad is destroyed, we'd reactivate the water tile beneath it. Turns out this wasn't going to work, so back to the code I went. First I made the water tile a general block tile that we'd use for all terrain code. Then I gave it type and active variables. Following that, in the lily pad code, I simply changed the active variable to false until it's destroyed. This thankfully worked, and theoretically in the future should allow us to only place lily pads on available water tiles. So with the lily pads working, it was time to move on to another plant. First, we need a grave, which again is going to share the same object as our water tile, which is now our general block tile. And we need our next plant, the grave buster. The grave buster is pretty simple. First, gravestones in the game act as blockables, preventing the placement of plants on those tiles. And grave busters, which can only be placed on gravestones, just so happen to find those gravestones very, very delicious. So much like our lily pad code on creation, the grave buster would store the ID of the gravestone it's about to consume. Then it would reposition itself slightly above the target gravestone and set its state timer. While the timer counts down to the next state, the grave buster slowly moves down. And once the timer hits 0, the state switches, destroying both itself and the target gravestone. This worked perfectly, with our gravestones behaving quite similarly to those in Plants vs. Zombies. And that makes 2 terrain-specific plants done. Which, fun side effect, when grave busters are placed on regular ground, they spring off screen like some kind of supercharged Super Ball. Anyway, with fun glitches aside, it was time to add more plants. Next up, the Tangle Kelp. The Tangle Kelp is another one-time use plant confined to only open water tiles. Once a zombie walks or swims over one of these, they're instantly pulled into the depths below, never to be seen again, aka likely the worst nightmare for anyone with thalassophobia. Now this one would be pretty simple. All we'd have to do is check for a zombie to be within proper range of the kelp, and once a zombie is within reach, we destroy both the kelp and the zombie. And indeed, that's just what they do. Again, for testing purposes, ignoring that we're not spawning them on water. So with that Terror of the Deep done, it was time to move on to another horror, the Doom Shroom. The Doom Shroom is, well, it's a nuke. When placed, it explodes, destroying or at least heavily damaging all enemies on screen. The payoff for such destruction is that it leaves behind a large crater, and this crater does not allow plants to be placed on it. So for this we would of course need our demonic looking Doom Shroom and the crater it would leave behind, which will also be using our general block tile. So in our plant code, I used the state timer to count down to the next state. In that next state, the Doom Shroom would destroy itself and, using a loop, would create a 3x3 block of block objects that would serve as our crater. And finally, for the time being, I had all zombies currently in the level destroyed. And boy oh boy, did this work. Just like in the actual game, the Doom Shroom is just as destructive, leaving behind just as ugly of a mess. So, while I was on a roll, I added the flower pot. Not much to add here, it's the lily pad equivalent for the rooftop levels. If you've played the game, you know why I'm not spending too much time talking about this one. So, moving on to the final plant for this session, the marigold. The marigold is a plant similar to the sunflower in that it doesn't attack but produces resources. But unlike the sunflower, instead of sunlight, the marigold spawns money. So of course we need a marigold sprite and a money sprite. Totally not inspired by an existing coin sprite, not at all. For the money object, we could use the exact same code as the sunlight, as their behavior is almost identical. And same goes for the marigold code. All that was needed was to spawn some money and then set a cooldown. The money object code would do its toss effect, and there we had it, the marigold was done. And with that, 5 more plants have been added to our clone, plus a flower pot. We're technically nearing the end of our to-do list here with only a few more unique plants left to code. Then it's just a matter of adding the upgraded versions, which shouldn't be nearly as difficult. But all that will have to wait because we've come to the end of this episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.